Good morning, class. Hello, hello, hello. Very glad to have us together here, albeit asynchronously. But despite that, I'm going to do everything I can to make this feel like a real class. So our topic is mass communication. This is, by the way, I'm going to admit right up front, as I actually did in the welcome letter you got 3 copies of. It's the first time I've taught this class. I have taught AC 271, which is Audiences and Media, a number of times. And I do have a fair amount of experience in advertising and media and marketing. You can verify that by looking at my LinkedIn profile, which I encourage you to do. And by the way, send me an invitation to LinkedIn. I like to keep track of my students and establish that kind of, add you to my network and vice versa. Okay, so something different for me about this particular course is the textbook is really good and, more importantly, very, very up to date. This new 11th edition has just recently been published. It's got lots of new examples of things. So I'm going to be relying on the book quite a lot to teach the course. So I hope you have it. Do read it. Again, I am going to be relying on it. Just to set the stage a little bit for our topic of mass communication, of course, there was a recent example of some of the massest, I may coin the phrase there, communication on the planet, which is the Olympics. The Olympics are normally the most watched event ever of any TV worldwide. Of course, this year's Olympics continued to be called the 2020 Olympics, even though they aired in 2021, and we all know what happened there. Don't need to, I don't think, repeat that. But I want to just talk about the Olympics this year a little bit. I don't know if any of you watched any of the Olympics, where you watched the Olympics, whether it was on a big 60-inch TV set, whether it was on your phone or on a computer, whether you watched when the events were happening, or whether you watched a recording, whatever. Just curious as to how many of you actually watched the Olympics. I would actually ask for a show of hands if this were a live class, but at least think about it and send me a vibe in terms of whether you watched it or not. Fortunately, the problem was with this particular Olympics is the viewership was way, way, way down. We'll be getting into this later in the term, but most mass media are ad-supported, meaning that the producer, the maker, the source of the content, the programming in this case, pays the person who makes the program, in this case it's the Olympics Committee, a big fee to have the broadcast rights. And the way they make money and make their money back and then make a profit is to run ads during the program. And they can charge more per ad and they can sell more ads if what? If viewership is high. Viewership, the number of people who watch something, that has a direct correlation with how much I can charge per ad. And viewership in these Olympics were down. In fact, primetime audience, primetime is after dinner TV watching, used to be kind of, believe it or not, a family occasion to sort of, have your meatloaf and mashed potatoes and carrots or whatever, and then sit down and watch, as of 8 o'clock, a couple hours worth of TV shows as prime time. It's the most expensive time. It's when most people used to watch and still do watch television programming, video programming. Anyway, the primetime audience was down over half. Why? Well, perhaps because moving to other times of day to watch, doing more on-demand viewing as opposed to watching the live event, but also the overall audience for the Olympics was down quite a bit. Evidently, NBC still made money, but it's not as good as it has been. And just ask yourselves why you think that people think of yourself. Put yourself in your own shoes. If you watched less Olympics or no Olympics this year versus the last, 4 years ago or a couple of years ago for the Winter Olympics, ask yourself why. Why? I want to make another point about this year's Olympics. There was a kind of a big story. And as we talk about mass communications, we are going to talk about stories quite a lot. Because the stories told in the media reflect the values of the culture and the beliefs of the culture, and probably have quite an influence on the beliefs and values of the culture. And there have been some changes, I think, in those cultural beliefs and values, which kind of culminated in this story in the Olympics. I don't know if you guys, when I say biggest story in the Olympics, I don't know what comes to mind for you, but this is what I'm thinking about. Okay, you guys know who this is? Okay, this young lady is Simone Biles, generally acknowledged as the best gymnast, women's gymnast, men's gymnast in the history of the sport. And do you remember what happened with Simone Biles this year with the Olympics? Well, a similar thing happened to Naomi Osaka. I don't have a picture of Naomi Osaka, I'm sorry to say, but I don't know if you guys know who she is, but she is a leading women's tennis player. She plays for Japan, and she's a mixed race, if I can say that, although I tend to think that there's just a human race. But she has a Japanese and black parents. Anyway, she, a couple of months ago, I think it was with the French Open, withdrew because she felt too much pressure in the press conferences, and just, I think in general, probably just too much pressure on her. She'd won some major tournaments very young, and so lots of attention on her, and maybe it was just a little too much for her. I don't know if this is exactly what happened to Simone Biles, but you may recall that she withdrew. She had a disappointing, I think it was a vault, and she said basically that she had the swirlies, or I forget. I'm sorry, I'm expressing this incorrectly, but the point is that her head was not in it, okay? And when you do the things that she does on these devices, you can really hurt yourself if your head isn't in it. So she withdrew from some major parts of the competition. And so why do I say the culture has changed? Because you think about both Naomi Osaka and Simone Biles, I think in the past, 5 years ago even, athletes withdrawing because they, pressure was too much, or they had some mental issues, some psychological issues, would have not been positively accepted by a lot of people. And I think, okay, there were a lot of people out there even this time that probably didn't accept this sort of behavior from top athletes. Top athletes are supposed to, quote, perform under pressure, unquote, no matter what. And these two decided to say no, okay? But what we saw this time, I think, for both of these women was the culture, basically, the media culture particularly, saying, yeah, this makes sense. That's how you feel. If that's where your head is at, then do what you have to do. You got to take care of yourself. And so, did mass communication influence how our cultural values have changed around athletes and performance? And how did mass communication influence that change? Question for us to ask ourselves. Because this class is about mass communication and about how it can impact culture, how it reflects culture. Most of all, it's for us as students of mass communication to have a media literacy approach to what we look at and what we absorb. And not just take everything for granted, not just swallow everything that's put on our plate, but take a good look at, why certain things are being communicated, what are the motives of the people behind it, and being a little more discerning about what's being said and broadcast and shown out there. And that's what our class is about. It's to make you more aware of and more knowledgeable about what lands on your plate in terms of mass communication. And it's about media literacy, which is part of the title of our textbook, Media Literacy. I don't know if you heard that. That was my pug, Eloise, who's staying with me for another day or two. And then she goes back to my daughter. So just a little bit of introduction to the theme of the class. You'll find I'm going to start pretty much every lecture with an agenda. I want to tell you what I'm going to tell you so you know what's ahead, okay, and can sort of be comfortable about it. And by the way, I don't want you to take in more than 15-minute. These lectures are going to be in 15-minute segments. Don't take in more than one or two of these at a time. It gets very, very monotonous and tough if you do that. You have a whole week to look at these things, at least a few days, and take a few days, okay? So I want you guys to be fresh as you look at these things. So before every class, I want to know if you have questions or concerns. I actually also want to get a list of what you've learned or what you learned in the class. So we're going to do that at the end of this class. I'm going to ask you what you learned. I'm just going to tip my hand on that a little bit. But right now, I want to see if anyone has. I want to be sure I've seen whether anyone has any questions or concerns about the class based on anything you've done or thought about up till now. So if you haven't yet, you can hit pause on this. You can go to Blackboard, go to this class, go to click Content, and you're going to see before first class. So every class will have a folder. So after this class, the folder will be called Week 1. Week 1 will have a recording of this class, and we'll have all the homework and reading assignments due before the next class, which will be in Week 2. Okay, so there'll be weekly folders. So the one to look at for this particular issue is before first class. And you'll see that there's an assignment, and you can submit any of your questions, and I will answer them on Blackboard. Okay, so I want us to have a little kind of dialogue. I want to keep my finger on the pulse of every one of you guys in terms of how's it going and what questions you have. We're going to do getting to know each other a little bit, but I am hoping, as of now, which is I'm recording this on Monday morning, the 23rd, I think it is. There are only a couple of getting to know you postings in the Padlet, but I want you to go to the Padlet. It's the first time I've used Padlet. It's like a wall where you can put your stuff and comment on other people's stuff. It's a way for you to see everybody in the class, I think it's pretty cool. I want to use Padlet a lot this term. Big thing we're going to do is we're going to review the syllabus, okay, and then I'm going to give a more in-depth overview. I kind of started it with our talk about the Olympics, but I'm going to get more into the main themes in Chapter 1. I'm going to do that in this lecture, and I'm going to finish up Chapter 1 next week. And then at the end of the class, I'm going to give you what's due before the next class.